In today's video, I'm going to unpack what retiring with $1 million actually looks like at each decade of your life. Because here's the deal, the decision on when you decide to retire matters just as much as how much you've saved and accumulated. Now, I've worked as a certified financial planner with retirees across the country for well over a decade, and I can tell you firsthand that retiring with $1 million can feel like total freedom to somebody at one age, and at the exact same time, be a financial trap to somebody else at a different age. And so today, I want to walk you through exactly how far $1 million will take you at age 55, 60, 70, and beyond, and the actual trade-offs, blind spots, and adjustments you're going to want to account for along the way once you hand in your resignation for the last and final time. So join me in this video as we unpack real life examples using our planning tools and discuss ways to maximize your retirement income, stretch out that investment portfolio, and design your ideal retirement plan. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and hop on in. I think we could all agree that $1 million doesn't go as far as it used to. It just plain doesn't. Things are more expensive. And the biggest culprit behind this is inflation. Over the past 100 years, inflation, it's averaged somewhere around 3.3%, but there have been times where it's spiked as high as 20% in World War II, just afterwards, or throughout the 70s, as high as 10% multiple times, or what we remember most recently is 2022, after the aftermath of the pandemic, where it hit as high as 8%. And the point is, what happens when inflation reaches these levels? Your money loses its purchasing power. It loses its value. Plain and simple, it just does not go as far as it used to, right? We can remember from basic economics class, the gallon of gas or the gallon of milk example, where it used to cost one thing and now it costs a much higher rate. And that could be applied to just about any example. Things cost more money as inflation ticks higher. One thing is true, that you're going to have a financial plan for your retirement that counters and adjust to beat inflation to be able to retire on your terms. And that all starts with knowing your numbers. It starts with knowing how much you could spend and when you can confidently and safely afford to retire. Before we look at how $1 million impacts retirement at age 55, 60, 70, I want to first break down how much income you can expect that $1 million portfolio to provide safely on an annual basis. Now, using simple math here on that $1 million figure, we're going to use a conservative rate of 4% that we're taking out of our portfolio. That gives us $40,000 a year in income. Now, for your own sake, if you want to push it to 4.5%, 5%, we know that we're taking on more risk of running out of money the earlier you retire and stretch out those distributions to rely on your portfolio sustaining a higher distribution. So just for this example, we're going to use our safe conservative 4% figure. Posted another video where we can go into distribution rates, but that's for another time. Now, in this example, we'll say our clients, remember Frank and Janet, they're both also going to have $2,000 a month each of Social Security. So that's $4,000 a month of Social Security benefits combined with $40,000 of portfolio income. That gives us $88,000 of total income, or $7,300 a month before taxes. Now, if we back out 20% to account for taxes, we're left with about $5,800 a month. And we have to ask ourselves, how far does that actually take you? $5,800 a month net after taxes. Because we start with this really big number of $1 million and we think, man, we got such a big figure. But when we actually break it down, even after adjusting for Social Security, that $1 million doesn't go as far as maybe we would once think. And especially if you're in your 50s wanting to retire early, I want to talk about something else, like understanding our budget and our numbers, knowing that cold when we take Social Security and how to make retirement our own, because those are all going to be really important factors that we want to get right before we dive into the actual examples. Northwestern Mutual recently released a survey stating that the average retiree now believes that they will need at least $1.5 million to retire comfortably. Keyword there being comfortably. And that number, what's staggering about this, it's up 53% since 2020. I'll say that again. That number has risen by over 50% in 5 years. And so if we go back to our example, what used to once be under $1 million in 2020 to retire comfortably, it's now risen over $500,000 because of inflation. And so using that same 4% withdrawal rate If we have to save an extra $1.5 million to feel comfortable in retirement, that gives us $60,000 a year from our $1.5 million portfolio to adjust for those now increased cost of living expenses. Because if inflation continues to hover right around 3.5%, our $1 million is going to be cut in half in terms of our purchasing power within 23 years. That's just the erosion that comes with inflation. And the same trend continues to play out the higher inflation ticks. It's the silent killer that we absolutely cannot underestimate and need to account for. One figure that I want to point out that the study does not cover, that's really important here, is that these studies do not account for those who have a house that is already paid off. And that's a big deal because housing, we know, usually eats up about 15 to 25% of our living expenses. So if you're in this exclusive club, about 63% of all retirees who have their house paid off, congratulations. This now translates, using these same figures, to spending more money, to enjoying retirement even more fully, because that's money back in our pocket. So understand that as we're looking at this survey, that if we have our house that's already paid off, congratulations, we can spend more. Because the name of the game is if we control our expenses, we control the game. We can make retirement on our terms, regardless of what happens with inflation. And this is especially important because research has found that retirement today looks really different than it did for previous generations. In fact, that same Northwestern Mutual survey found that 8 in 10 Americans say that their retirement looks completely different from that of their parents, because it now includes more time for travel, more experiencing, spending money to align with what brings them joy, purpose, and fulfillment. And this is a really good thing, but we're going to need to have a plan that adjusts and adapts and accounts for those extra expenses. And especially if we're planning on retiring in our early 50s, 60s, based on the math from the previous example, using that $1 million figure and having it support $40,000 of income, that's not a whole lot of wiggle room left for those big trips, experiences, so on and so forth. Now, retirement is all about flexibility. It's all about being able to have trade-offs, right? I say all the time, it's a basic math equation. It's your fixed sources of income of what you have coming in, whether it's Social Security, a part-time job, a pension, minus your living expenses. And whatever amount you're short needs to come from your portfolio. And so we have trade-offs to figure out how do we align our money with what's most important. Because retirement, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's deeply, deeply personal. And one of, if not the most important factors taking into consideration outside of personal spending, is where we're going to spend our time. It's where we're going to live. Because where we live, it matters just as much as how much we have saved and accumulated or the decision of when to retire. And so we can look at living in a low cost of living area. It doubles our money. It doubles our fund budget. I like to call that geographic arbitrage because we get to do more and stretch that money further. And the same goes with evaluating where we live based off of state taxes, property taxes, housing costs, cost of living for things like dining out. It's going to be more expensive to eat at a cafe in Los Angeles and Hawaii than it is going to be in rural Michigan or Indiana. And so location absolutely matters. Now, let's talk about the cold hard numbers, because I know this is what you came here for. And the timing of your retirement is really when the math begins to shift. And so starting at retiring at 55, using that same 4% rule on $1 million, that gives us $40,000 a year, $3,300 a month before taxes, about $2,500, $2,600 a month after taxes. Now, it's no Social Security yet. You're too young. And you're also going to need to factor in how to cover private health insurance out of pocket and how to also navigate early withdrawal penalties from your retirement accounts. And so to make this work, and we'll dive into the actual e-money here in just a moment, we're probably going to need something to the effect of a second source of income, a pension, part-time job, potentially with benefits, right? A paid-off house, that's going to be very helpful and maybe very low cost of living. And so what we can see here for Frank and Janet, they're close, right? When we look at their financial situation, they have $1 million saved today at age 54. They want to see, can we afford to retire at 55, right? They're empty nesters. They've been able to save and accumulate over $1 million. They have really good jobs today, making close to $300,000 combined. We see they're going to have a great Social Security depending on what age they choose to claim that. And Janet's also going to have a pension, which is fantastic. We also see their living expenses. They're accustomed to living a really nice life, $10,000 a month plus a small mortgage that they have. Now, when we run these numbers of whether or not they can afford to retire at 55, one of the things that we start to find here when we start to run our analysis, we're going to have to make some changes. You have heard me say throughout this video and most of my videos that retirement is about making sacrifices. It's about making adjustments. And so if Frank and Janet want to retire today, they're going to have to make these sacrifices that look like cutting their income in half. If they're going to want to spend over $1,000 a month on travel and experiences, they can afford to spend with Janet's pension $60,000, which is about $5,000 a month, because they're going to need that $1 million nest egg to last them over the next 30 to 40 years. Now, when we start to look at our 60s, though, this is where things start to get a little more interesting, because now we're getting closer. We still have those same things like healthcare still being expensive and out of pocket, but Medicare, it's just around the corner. We have Social Security now. We may be tempted to claim that early, but that we know comes with permanent reductions. And we need to figure out when we want to pull Social Security, because with that permanent reduction, do we want to put more pressure on our portfolio now as we allow Social Security to grow, or later down the road by claiming it earlier today? And again, there's no right or wrong answer. It depends on your situation. And so what we see here for Frank and Janet is at 60, by working 5 more years, we can now spend an additional $2,000 a month. That's pretty significant. And our plan's not in jeopardy, even in the slightest. We could spend that $2,000, leave money left over for our heirs. And guess what? We still have money left over to travel. Now, we all know where this number is heading and kind of the sequence of how this is trending. If they want to retire at 70, we can go back to spending the exact same amount, $10,000 a month, because now we're in the comfort zone. They have full Medicare. They're maxing out their Social Security, which is potentially 30% higher than where they would have been at 67. But now their retirement window is shorter. See, they can afford to spend a lot more, but we're also going to have to account for potentially rising healthcare costs or inflation that continues to compound, or even long-term care costs. But still, retiring in your 70s with $1 million is a very different game than trying for Frank and Janet to pull it off at 55. So as we can see, for Frank and Janet, the longer they work, the better their outcome. The more they can spend significantly improves. But if you're watching this and you're thinking that I'm by any stretch advocating for you to wait until age 70 with $1 million, that's not the case. Yes, you'll have more to spend. You'll have delayed Social Security, so you'll be getting maximum benefits. But remember, retirement is deeply personal. It's what matters to you. And so, yes, the numbers have to work, but this is your permission to get creative. See, it's all about trade-offs. Frank and Janet, they could retire at 55 and cut their spending in half. They could spend a little more if they worked until 60. We could also look at what it looks like if Janet's pension was not there, or what if they got a part-time job? What we have to remember is to keep our distribution rates historically in check, to keep our retirement spending within reason. And this is also a perfect reminder of what we're here for. If you have questions, if this just seems like a lot, there's too many moving pieces, click on the link in the description below, fill out the survey, and we'll send you a personalized Loom video going through your personal retirement situation, answering your questions, and scheduling a time to meet. Social Security is going to be one of, if not the biggest decisions to make in retirement planning. Whether it's claiming at 62, 67, full retirement age, or 70, that can mean a difference of quite literally hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. And so if you want more information on that, check out my video called I Claimed Social Security Again, and I would do this instead. Because when it comes to your sources of fixed income in retirement, the money that you have coming in, this amount is going to determine how much pressure you're going to eventually need to put on your retirement portfolio. Because any amount of fixed income that you're short, meaning that income doesn't meet your living expenses, you're going to have to take a distribution from your portfolio to cover that. And if we take too big of a distribution, we run the risk of putting our retirement at jeopardy and spending too much and running out of money too soon. But I like to think about it this: if our numbers work, we can get really close to having Social Security maybe part-time work, or in Frank and Janet's case, a pension, and bond and dividend portfolio from our retirement portfolio that's separate from a distribution, if this gets close to meeting our living expenses, this means that our $1 million portfolio can now be used purely for discretionary expenses. That is a great spot to get to. That's the sweet spot, because this now means no withdrawal pressure, lower sequence of return risk, right? If a bad, nasty bear market happens, we're still okay because we don't have to take out as much money. And even, this is an anomaly, but actually portfolio growth while we're pulling money out. And so the more guaranteed income that we have from those different sources, the less stress we feel. Finally, once we put this all together, we have our Social Security strategy. We know our fixed income sources coming in. We know how far that's going to take us, what we're short, how much we could safely spend from our retirement portfolio. We need to also be able to factor in those surprises. We talked about inflation earlier. We also talked about healthcare, long-term care costs, and how to adjust with our plan for market corrections. Remember, make retirement your own and be flexible. Flexibility is the key, because retirement is not about hitting a magic number. It's about creating a consistent and sustainable income figure that supports the life that you actually want and that the numbers work. And so now that you understand what $1 million will get you at 55, 60, 70, every retirement stage, and how location, right, where you live, inflation and your income sources change and impact everything, you can now make more confident and informed decisions. And if you still have questions, go ahead and click on the link in the description below, fill out the survey, type in any questions that you have, and we will make you a personalized Loom video walking you through your plan step by step so that you can stop guessing and start planning with more confidence. I'll see you in the next video.